Hi there. I think vinyl records are an endearing and arcane way to listen to music. I don't really think it's a very accurate medium for reproducing sound, though. If you look at it scientifically, it's kind of bad sound. Now, I definitely don't encourage you to ignore science in your life choices, but maybe you can just this one time because it's kind of a buzzkill. Personally, I like to think of records as being kind of a romantic sound. So I don't hold it to the same rules as I do with other sound and audio stuff. Just playing a record has a lot of mechanical problems that need to be solved, such as getting the disc to spin at exactly the right speed all the time, which is surprisingly difficult, and of course, getting that tiny little needle to scrape along the grooves at just the right angle with just the right amount of pressure to resist the centrifugal force that wants to throw it off the edge. It's all very tricky. If you want to do it perfectly, you have to have some pretty precise equipment that's been set up very exactly. Thankfully, most of us, including me, are not here to make it perfect. We just want it to be good enough to not kill the vibe. But if you're here looking at this video, you likely have plans to put some of your own music on a piece of vinyl. So since you're spending all this money and going to all this effort, I figure we might as well try and make it as good as we can, right? So, small disclaimer. I am an audio engineer, but I'm not a mastering engineer. However, I do have the kind of experience with this that gives you some earned wisdom. So that's what I will be telling you about, and whenever possible, I'm going to keep it to the point. I'd love if this little instructional in 2 parts helps the average musician demystify their record-making process a bit and lets them get some more control of it too. So I'm not going to go too deep on video and descriptions of all the processes of how a record is made, because other people have done that with better production values that I currently am capable of. So I'll leave it to them. Do look it up though, because it's actually really neat. There's a very few relevant details about this process that I think we should be on the same page about, so I'll speak about those briefly. So, when you go to get your record made through a broker to the factory, or from your label to a broker to the factory, besides the fun packaging and aesthetics of everything, which I love, you generally have a couple options about the actual sound part. The 2 big ones are the vinyl audio master and the master disc cut. The audio vinyl master is a special bit of EQ, compression, and stereo spectrum tweaks that compensate for some of the inherent limitations of physically carving your music onto spinning discs. This is a related but separate thing from the master recording that you receive from the mastering studio that you use for streaming MP3s and maybe CDs. Most manufacturing places will offer this service, and it's pretty likely they'll do a good job. For me, though, I always like to get this step done by my mastering engineer because I think it's something that's worth being real careful about, and I can hear it before it goes out to make sure it doesn't sound all messed up. The disc cutting is the part where they actually do the engraving of the music into the master disc. That in a number of steps later, they're going to turn into a stamper, which is a metal mold that they press into the hot vinyl blobs to flatten them out and make the final product, one by one. So once I had this disc cutting done by an outside specialist studio, and it was great. But I did learn that by doing that, you're usually adding more cost, and it's hard to compensate for the randomness of shipping nowadays. And, most importantly, the more steps you get the factory to handle, the less they can blame a manufacturing error on someone else in the chain. So, since it's a step that is a little less creative and more based on experience, equipment, and skills, I generally feel okay about having the factory do it the way they want to. There's 2 ways to do disc cutting, and a bit of a debate over which one sounds better, and I'm going to decline joining it. One way is DMM, or direct metal mastering, which means they cut your music onto a copper disc, and that way they can skip a few of the steps to get to the stamper. And the old school way is lacquer disc cutting, where they carve it into a resin disc basically made out of fancy dried tree sap. And it's definitely a bit more work to get it made into the stamper plate. In the end, there's good things about both of the methods. But for me, I think the wiser path tends to be how your manufacturer does things the most often, because that's likely going to be the method that will have less potential problems. And that's the goal here, less problems. So, as you may have guessed by now, there's a surprising amount of little things that can go wrong with manufacturing records, and due to the expense and time of fixing it, it's likely no one is going to mention a problem if you don't. So how are you going to check for problems? Well, first, let's get a few things prepared. Firstly, you should always get the test pressings. It costs a little extra, but it's definitely worth it. And if you don't do that, there's not much point in watching the rest of the videos, so good luck. There is a certain quality level that you have a right to expect, and getting some testing discs is your only way to check up on it. So when these test pressings show up at your door, You will generally get about 5 to 8 discs. It's very tempting to hand these out to the band or your parents right away, but you need to hold off on that for a little bit. Don't play them and keep them all together in one place, and then you can hand them out when we're finished. Secondly, if you don't have a turntable or a lot of confidence in how good it is, time to go locate the best one you can use. Nowadays, somebody you know probably has a pretty nice turntable with a needle in reasonably good condition. Doesn't need to be super fancy, but that wouldn't hurt. It's worth asking if it's ever had a setup by a stereo repair person, and if not, it might be worth taking it to your local home audio shop to have it done before you start. A good shop will also have a microscope so they can actually tell you what condition the needle is in, and they can balance out all that mechanical stuff I was talking about at the beginning of the video. If a setup at a shop is really not an option, do a little research and learn some of the basics to do it yourself. You can get some really good results with some simple tools and a little patience. And it can really make a big difference to getting an accurate test. I mean, it's kind of exacting, but it's not rocket science. I mean, it almost sort of involves a little ballistics, so I guess it's sort of a little like rocket science, so maybe it's sort of rocket science adjacent, but it's really not bad, I swear. By now, I'll assume you have found the ideal testing turntable, perhaps an amenable audiophile friend of yours. So grab a laptop with some multi-track recording software of your choice and a 2-channel audio interface, and go camp out in their living room for a few hours. Now, if you've never recorded anything off a vinyl record before, there are a few specific things that you should know about it. I'll assume you have the basic recording skills needed to get an interface working, plug some stuff in, and make some recordings that aren't peaking out and distorting like crazy, because most musicians nowadays do know how to do that. So if you aren't very confident there, call a friend to do it with you, or do some research about that too so you can do it solo. This is not going to be very complicated. So first, you should get a look at the turntable and the stereo system you're going to use to make sure you have the right cable connections for it. So most home audio systems use RCA-style jacks and plugs. It's very likely you'll want to adapt that to a 1/4-inch connection, which is a pro audio standard. It's the same kind of signal, so you just need to change from one plug to another with a cable or a couple little adapters. On RCA cables, generally the red plug is for the right channel. If it isn't red, sometimes it's the darker colored one, or actually it just says right or left on it. On the RCA jacks on the stereo system, they're generally color-coded red and white or black and white, and some just have left and right written next to them as well. So just make sure you don't get them all mixed up. It's pretty rare to find a set of RCA analog stereo inputs on a modern USB recording interface, but it does exist. However, remember, if you have just a single RCA jack for in and out, and it's labeled digital or SBIDF, don't use it because it's not going to work. The other thing to always remember is that a turntable needs a phono preamp to interface with any other kind of audio device. This is a specialized circuit that boosts up the signal and adds a standardized EQ curve, called the RIAA curve, that every record needle needs. This isn't an optional thing. If you just plug the turntable into a normal audio input without a specific phono preamp between them, it'll sound like utter garbage. And for that matter, if you plug any other piece of gear into a phono input, it will also sound like utter garbage. The good news is that any older 70s to early 90s stereo system has this phono preamp thing built in. So you're going to want to get the signal from your recording out of the receiver/stereo amp that the turntable is plugged into. There's 2 easy ways to do this. If there's a headphone jack on the stereo, that's the easiest one. If it's old, it's probably a 1/4-inch stereo jack on the front. If it's newer, it might have the more modern and smaller 1/8 stereo jack. Again, all you really need is an appropriate cable or an adapter, but make sure it's actually stereo, that is separating left and right out of the headphone jack. When you use this, watch out for the levels, because it's designed to drive headphones, and it's gonna come out pretty hot. Not that it would break anything, but it's easy to get lots of distortion that way, so turn the headphone volume down on the stereo really low when you start. If there's no headphone jack, or it's not working for some reason, most of the time the older stereos, besides having turntable inputs, also have them for tape machines. And when they have those, they usually have outputs to go into the tape machine. Those are usually labeled REC for record. They have these so you can dub your favorite records and radio shows onto cassette tapes to play in your Camaro later that night. Optionally, you could use a Firebird, but it's also a convenient spot to get the signal from the turntable through the phono preamp and out to your interface. In order to get the sound to work, you're going to have to use a switch or possibly a push button on the front of the stereo called tape monitor. Sometimes there's even more than one of these switches, but they're all different on every stereo, so you just have to keep switching them all around until you hear something. It's rare, but some very modern turntables have the phono preamp built in. Some of these turntables even have a USB out, which means it has its own built-in audio interface too. If you have one of those at your disposal, you can just load the drivers for the turntable onto your computer and use the USB to record direct to your software. Nice and easy. Now let's get the records themselves ready to go. It's unlikely your discs are going to have much dust on them right from the factory, but it might not hurt to give them a quick brush. Also check that the needle doesn't have any of those teeny tiny dust bunnies stuck to it, because that will definitely affect the sound. If there is one, be very careful and use a little cartridge brush to gently get rid of it. Brand new records do tend to have more static charge built up in them though, and the little shocks that can happen from that while you are playing it can cause quite a lot of extra crackling noise. So if it seems like it's really staticky, like your laundry, there's an easy way to reduce that. You can use a $100 anti-static gun if you happen to have one, but I just use the gooseneck barbecue lighter, because it works, it looks cool, and it's cheap. Just turn it on, slowly move it around close to the surface, and don't actually touch the record with the little Bernie mad scientist lightning part of it. A few sweeps around the record usually works really well. So once you get it all hooked up, and you have some sound from a record coming in on the headphones that you now have plugged into your interface, make sure the input levels are set extra safe so there's absolutely no way it's peaking out, and then get started. You want to make yourself a nice and clean stereo recording of each side of each test record. So if you happen to have 5 pressings, you will have 10 tracks, 5 side A's and 5 side B's. Get all the discs that you got from the factory into your recording software, and then you can stop bothering your friend's cat and get out of their living room. Okay, now we're in the studio. And now we have our recording tracks in a session. I happen to use Cubase, but you can use whatever you want. As you can see, I have visually lined up all my side A's so that the audio starts at exactly the same time. Zoom in and get them as close to perfect as possible, because that is a key part of this. So don't skimp out on it. Then line up all your side B tracks the same way. It might also be handy to bring your master digital tracks into the session, or if you have that, even better, the audio vinyl master, just whatever you have, as a direct comparison to the ones you've recorded off the discs. Okay, so that ends part 1 of this video. We're all properly set up now to be able to do the actual testing part of this, and in part 2, you can learn how to do that, and also some tips on what to do if you find a problem. I'm looking forward to seeing you there.